You know that meeting. We all do. The one where the exact same argument about pipeline or lead quality happens again. It's this exhausting, unproductive loop. So in this explainer, we're going to take a scalpel to those arguments and figure out what is really going on underneath.
Let's just start with the obvious truth. Revenue teams argue constantly. It's almost the background noise of the business, right? The endless debates between sales, marketing, and leadership about the forecast, the pipeline. It's just this constant, familiar cycle.
But here is the first and maybe most important thing to understand. The reason these arguments go on forever isn't actually because people fundamentally disagree on the goal. No, everyone wants to hit the number. Everyone wants to win. That's not the issue.
The real problem, the reason you keep having the same conversation, is that nothing is ever truly settled. The arguments are just a symptom. They keep happening because the core decision that would finally end the debate has never actually been made.
And this leads us straight to the most common mistake we make. We see all this conflict and we call for more alignment. We think if we just get everyone in a room and align, these arguments will stop. But that fundamentally misunderstands the problem.
Let's break this down. On one hand, you have shared intent. This is agreeing on the goals. It creates a feeling of unity, and yeah, it gets things moving. But on the other hand, you have settled decisions. This is about committing to the hard trade-offs. It creates a real path forward, and most importantly, it creates closure.
Look, here's the bottom line. Alignment doesn't actually decide anything. It doesn't force a choice. It doesn't make anyone own the difficult parts. Alignment feels good, it feels like progress, but it neatly avoids the one thing that would actually end the argument, a real binding decision. So, if the arguments aren't really about the big goal, what are they about? Well, this gets us to the idea of the safety of execution. It turns out teams are, often unconsciously, choosing to have the cheaper, safer conflict. Think about it. Arguing about tactics, the campaign plan, the sales script, it feels productive. It feels like we're doing stuff. And, most critically, all those choices are reversible. If it doesn't work, we can just change it. It doesn't have that terrifying finality of a core strategic decision. This is just classic decision avoidance. So you really have two different battlegrounds. You've got the execution arguments. They're low stakes, they're reversible, they feel productive. And then you have the core decision arguments. Those are high stakes. They feel largely irreversible. And because of that, they feel dangerous. So where do teams naturally gravitate? To the safer place, to the execution debates, because it's so much easier than confronting a huge, unsettled decision. Okay, so why are these huge, foundational decisions being avoided in the first place? The answer usually isn't about clashing personalities. It's about something much deeper, ambiguous ownership. The problem is baked right into the system itself. The technical term for this is structural disagreement. And it's key to understand this isn't about interpersonal conflict. It's not that Sarah and Mike don't get along. It's a persistent state of conflict that comes directly from ambiguity, from nobody knowing who owns the final say on the really fundamental trade-offs. And these structural disagreements, they pop up in very specific places. Who truly owns demand certainty? Where are the exact ownership boundaries between teams? Who has the final call on critical trade-offs? And who is ultimately accountable when the pressure is on? When these things are not explicitly and clearly owned, conflict isn't just likely, it becomes the default. You see, when decision ownership is left vague, arguments literally become the operating system of the team. Debate becomes the only tool you have to push things forward. It's not because people enjoy fighting, it's because no single person has been given the authority to provide closure. So what do we do with all this? The very first step is to completely reframe the problem. These reoccurring arguments, they aren't a sign of failure. They are a valuable signal. And it's a signal that always gets louder under pressure. The cycle is incredibly predictable. First, the pressure rises. Maybe a target is missed, or a new priority lands from the board. Second, that pressure immediately puts a spotlight on the ambiguous ownership. And third, right on cue, the same old unresolved debate kicks off again. This is probably the most important takeaway of our entire conversation. If you have had the same revenue argument for 3 quarters straight, the argument itself is not the problem. The missing decision is the problem. So let me be absolutely clear. Recurring arguments are not a sign of a dysfunctional team or a broken culture. They are a precise indicator. Think of it like a flare going up, signaling one very specific thing. A critical question of ownership remains undecided. And that, of course, brings us to the real question. If alignment meetings aren't the answer,
And if these arguments are just signals, then where are these crucial revenue decisions actually supposed to be made? We'll dig into that in our next explainer.